And this first collection of poems is a three-part poem that I did share at Oregon Country Fair this year. We were part of the virtual fair with Mia Vance, who's on the video today. Hi, Mia, you're awesome. And this is called the Cattail Suite. I grew up in a little spit of land right there along the shores of Michigan. It was sandwiched right between the Saginaw Bay and the Tobago Marsh. It was in Caucholin, Michigan, is what it's called. And there was one road that granted us access to our home, and it ran straight through the middle of the Tobago Marsh. And it was flanked on both sides by waters that were thick with cattail weeds. And there are certain things that when I see them, I'm immediately taken all the way back to Caucholin, Michigan. And cattails is one of those things that since I've left Michigan, since I've left Caucholin, that's always been the piece that has always felt most like home. So this is three poems that are kind of inspired by the cattails. I'll call it the Cattail Suite. So part one, my friend, the cattail. They welcome me, these old friends, as I push on the pedal of my hand-me-down bike, holding wonders within their reeds, palaces to fight dragons or underwater worlds where mermen swim. They bend at my creative will, turning tan texture into multi-chrome wonder. In dry years, we carved intricate mazes through the tangled reeds. Large crop circles like alien formations were deemed clubhouse, with entrance exclusive and muskrat as doorkeeps. We called ourselves kings and queens in our cattail canyons, companions to our wonder. We found infinite in the thicket, each year with new growth, planting new opportunities to dream. In wet years, we donned waist-high rubbers, wading our way through muck and muddle in search of duck nests and beaver dams. Our skin absorbed the stagnant stank of still waters as we rushed home to shower before mother or father could question our algae-coated complexion. We found worlds in those reeds, truths and fictions, realities and fantasies. Whatever we sought, they held. Now, as I grew older, these cattail companions lost some of their wonder. With license in hand, our independence shifted from places we could reach on bike to those we could reach with the gas we purchased with income earned from bottle deposits and cutting grass. I'll be honest in saying that I wasn't a good driver. That is, you're going to find out about that in just a little bit. I was a pretty distracted teen. Around the time that I was turning 16, 17, puberty really had kind of cracked open in me a realization that I had been suppressing my whole life, which was noticing the guy's smile here, kind of thinking about cuddling a classmate there, this feeling of realizing that I was probably gay. And I grew up in a pretty conservative Christian house, and that was one of the worst things you could possibly be. And that drive home every single day from practice or school or work or wherever it was kind of became a place where I had to drop all of those things on the side of the road. And I started to hate myself, truthfully. And they kind of became a representative of how much I hated myself. And so the cattails, they suddenly shifted from being these companions to haunting me, judging me, and hating me. So this next part is called Learning to Drive. I used to mix CDs with flavors ranging from cayenne to vanilla. They filled a book in my sidekick footwell. Sharpie etched surfaces read a message to readers: beware he, she who listens. I never understood how to follow heartache with hard rock, but with water-filled eyes, I cast a net, pulling sonnet and virus from the dark web. I learned to drive by sliding cars into ditches. I used AC in winter because it was easier than taking off my coat. In summer, I lost some sunglasses and glove compartments and let gummies melt across the dashboard. My car collected my mistakes. I had CDs I only played when I drove alone. I don't remember what songs were in the mix, but I recall the shame of them. 17 tracks for 17 years. I didn't like myself, but I pretended to. I learned to drive by running stop signs and T-boning fragile elders in larger cars, by smashing face first into airbag and crying on curbsides. I hated myself and didn't know how to keep my eyes on the road while changing channels. One time I drank bad beer in the basement of someone's house I barely knew. He played a song on my secret CD. I drove my car into a traffic sign and learned I hate myself but should improve my driving. I was 17 and I pretended with CDs and footwells and eyes barely on the road. I learned to drive by plowing through snowdrifts and hitting the brakes too hard. I just remembered Norah Jones was on my secret CD. I pretended I didn't hate myself. Over time, I got better at driving. Well, as soon as I got done with high school, I moved away, trying to escape this place that had taught me how to hate myself. And truthfully, I wasn't out yet. And eventually, I moved away to college, which was on the other side of the state. And every time that I came home, that sickly feeling would form in the pit of my stomach along that stretch of land where the cattails grow. I moved further away, trying to escape it as far as Oregon. And through community and a lot of self-work, I did learn to love myself again. I remember the day that I first saw a bunch of cattails growing in a ditch somewhere over in Springfield. And I thought, oh, hello, I've missed you. Something shifted in me around that time, something that reminded me that these cattails, they used to be the key definer of home, that actually they loved me before I loved myself. And I realized they never hated me. They were always there to remind me where I was. They welcomed me. They tell me they missed me. They tell me to bring all of me, as much of me as I can carry. So this is part 3, homecoming. Drive north, just a little further than you think you should go until the split of I-75 guides you to a less traveled road. Turn right off the highway. There where the light blinks yellow and rarely holds red, past railroad track with signs begging you to yield. For locals, this message is a suggestion. Proceed at your own pace. Just past the yellow and blue house, you'll find them. There on the edge of Parish Road, these dense auburn fluff-topped, yellow-green necked companions, I bring in my suitcase all the pieces of me I used to drop roadside. They hold in their waters anxiety, sweats, and desperate tears, high-pitched laughter and inconsolable fears, everything that I dropped throughout these years they've held for me, transformed them into wildflowers, cradled them in mallard's nest, matted them in mink's soft fur to tell me those pieces you thought you had to strip from sight are the bits we hold most dear. I drive with straighter spine through humidity-filled air as the wind whispers through the reeds. Welcome home. You've never looked more like yourself. Oh, sorry, that one always gets me at the very end. So that's the Cattail Suite, kind of a little introduction to where I grew up, right there in the cattails in the marsh, right there on the bay. And as I was continuing to think about what kind of poems to maybe pull together for the reading today, there's someone who immediately comes to mind for me when it comes to Halloween, and that's my grandma Rita. I was a grandma's boy growing up through and through. I am still made fun of for it to this day. Anytime I got upset, I would say, I'm going to grandma's, and I'd get on my bike and I would go straight to her house. But there was a special tradition that I had with my grandma, and that was right around Halloween. She had all the Halloween decorations you can think of. She had wooden tchotchkes and ceramic pumpkins and glass pieces, and she would go all out for it. And it was always my duty to help her with that setup. I think part of it was because we had a very special relationship, but also because I had a little bit of an artistic eye. And I loved going to craft fairs with her, so we often went hunting for new Halloween decorations every year. So I decided to put together another set of poems that is kind of to honor my grandmother, and I'll call this the Grandma Suite. This first one, some context for you, about 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, my grandmother was at the oldest age. She just turned 90 this year, so she's still with us. And a few years ago, she had open heart surgery. It was the last year of her life that she could possibly have open heart surgery. And it played a huge toll on her. We thought we were going to lose her. It was very scary. And being especially in Oregon with her in Michigan, that was really hard. So immediately, as soon as she was back home, I scheduled a trip home to be with her for a week. And it was a hard week. It was really tough. It was the toughest I've ever seen her in respect to how it impacted her body. And so I wrote this poem on the flight home after visiting her. This is called Flowers for Grandma in 5 parts. Part 1, Sunflowers. I greeted her with sunflowers in hand, an attempt to bring a little of the outside inside. She smiled with surprise. Get a vase. I placed them on the fireplace mantle, angled to shine on her as she sat in her seat. I hoped it would remind her of Florida, where she would sunbathe on the beach through winter. They lasted only 2 days. I don't know if it was the water or the worry I poured into the vase that took them too early. Part 2, hydrangeas. She had thin skin, blackened from each firm touch, delicate like the hydrangea suffering in the high heat of summer. Let me water your plants, I said, wishing to soothe the burns. Get the roots good, she instructed. I gave them more water than they needed, just in case. Part 3, daisies. She asked me to plant daisies in her garden. They were wilting after being locked in a plastic pot teetering on the edge of her kitchen sink. They perked up after just 1 day in the ground. She sat on her stoop and pointed with a glisten in her eye. Look at them. You've done good. Her spine seemed straighter, like the stems of daisies invigorated after breathing fresh air for the first time in their life. The next day, 2 buds were missing. Rabbits, she said. They eat everything I plant. I inspected the nibbles from the leaves. I don't think it's going to make it, I replied. What did I do to deserve this life, she asked. I found myself having fewer answers with each day that passed. Her eyes shimmered like the last petals of the daisy as I tried to protect what was left. Part 4, hibiscus. She took her walk of the day to the side of the garage where hibiscus vines stood tethered to 3 trellises. She plucked a blossom from the middle vine, the one lush with pink petals. There, she said. Now I don't have to work so hard to appreciate its beauty. My aunt told me the vines were smaller this year. My aunt told me the vines were smaller that year, yet it was the most flowers she'd ever seen. I guess sometimes things may look weak, but that doesn't mean they're dying. Part 5, irises. They need more sun, she argued, as we sat in the living room looking out the window. That tree got too big, took all their light. I suggested moving them, but no one knew what time of year was best. They're tough, I said. Just make sure they're packed in good soil and give them love. They'll make it. I know they will. We sat in silence. Yeah, she said. We could all use some good soil. Especially now, I replied. It's been good having you home, she said softly. I thought of iris gardens for years to come and prayed for sunny days. So that poem is one that I wrote on the plane ride home. I was absolutely distraught. I was sobbing, absolutely sobbing in my seat next to this woman right after I finished reading it. I just had to stare out the window for the whole flight. But it was a reminder of just how good writing can feel for processing those really difficult moments. And I have to pair this with the next poem that I wrote on my next flight back to Oregon from Michigan. It was a year later. The pandemic had broken out, and I realized I'm working from home. I might as well work from home in Michigan. So I took a month. I flew back to Michigan, quarantined for 2 weeks, and got to spend a full 2 weeks with my grandma, who was looking much better at that point. And this is the poem that I wrote for her on the flight back from that. Flowers for Grandma Part 2, or Look How They've Grown. I flew out of Oregon as daffodil starts were peeking through the surface of frosted curbside gardens. I landed in Michigan as the first real snowfall hit and the ice secured herself across the Saginaw Bay. She looked older, but better, like our Daphne after the ice storm. She'd lost some branches since last I'd seen her, and her trunk had a bend to it I don't think was there before, but her roots seemed more sure of themselves, secured to something like maybe hope. She lifted herself from the lazy boy recliner to pull me down into her small frame. The moment felt monumental as a Doug fir sapling on a mountainside stripped of its forested exterior. She broke something in me like an aquifer bursting forth with cool water from an underground lake. I looked at her and said, I'm home. I placed a small pot of narcissus starts on her fireplace banister and prayed, I hope they grow. I planted myself on her couch that month and absorbed her light into every surface of my being. She was chamomile growing in tough clay, a rose bush standing in the wind, a hawthorn planted on sandy shores. She was never tended to through her life, and yet she turned trauma into tinctures and tea to comfort those she loved. She translated deficit into surplus, and here I was filling my cup. On my last day in town, she held me in her hug longer than normal, said, "I didn't realize how much I'd missed you." I said, "Me too." She looked at the narcissus, standing tall and filled with blossoms and small yellow bursts, and said, "Look how they've grown." So she's doing great. She is so back on her feet and really recovered from that. And you kind of heard a little bit in that poem that my grandma is one of the toughest ladies I know. She was raised during the Great Depression, had to drop out of high school to care for her family, married to two men who were incredibly abusive to her and caused her incredible harm through her life. There's never really been a time in her life where she's been dealt the hand that really matches the kindness that she presents the world. And we are Scottish. That is our heritage. And you can see it all around her house. Her house is filled with little Scottish figurines and plaid and all those things. And this is another poem that I wrote after that visit when I was sitting in her dining room and I noticed that there was a dried thistle that was in a little glass display case. And I asked her where that was from. And it was a thistle that my aunt had brought back from her when she took a trip to Scotland. My grandma has never been to Scotland, but she loves Scotland with all of her being because her mother was from Scotland. And so after I saw that, it struck me. I was like, oh my gosh, my grandma, she's a thistle. Of course she is. So this is a poem that I wrote that's called How Fitting She's a Thistle. This woman, seated in a pristine living room of creams and teals, rocking slowly, tiptoeing through memory and remembrance, even those she wishes to forget. I watch spines grow from her callous leaves as stories she would never call trauma flow from thin pink lips into the muscles of my heart. Holding gently to her stem, I wish for thicker skin, like the kind she has grown to shift from sadness to laughter and song. Just a wee duck in Doris, just a wee drop, that's all. Just a wee duck in Doris, afore ye gang awa. I watched her petals, bright violet against sage and sand, burst forth from her glistening eyes as we stumbled over tongue twister and language foreign in our American mouths. Yet we tried. If you can say it's a blobdick moonlick, then you're all right, you can. I suddenly understand why such a rough flower could be the symbol of our ancestral land. Of course she is a thistle. This resilient woman with warrior in her bloodstream, I see generations in the laugh lines that double as aqueducts for tears. She is a flower never intended for plucking or picking, but growing wild in tough rock and dry air. Never letting a lack of comfort keep her from her summer bloom, she is a thistle, and I am her seed, floating in the wind, waiting for a wee button bend to fill with flowers. So in that poem, you heard a little bit of a song, which is a song that my grandma used to sing to us all the time when we were little. While I was home, she sang that song to me many a times, and it was wonderful and beautiful. So that was my little tribute to my grandma, who I love dearly. Do I have time for one more poem? Is that okay? Awesome, cool. Well, I feel like it wouldn't be fair to talk about Halloween if it weren't for if I didn't talk about my mother, because she's also another person who comes to mind when I think of Halloween. I was a clown for, I want to say, probably at least 8 of my Halloweens growing up, because she did the paint perfectly. And so it was any year that I didn't know what to be, she made me a clown. And I remember she would always paint our faces right there in the kitchen. And in the kitchen is this beautiful set of fine china that was a wedding fine china for my mother and father. And a few years ago, I was just reflecting about that fine china that existed in our dining room. We never used it. It always stayed right there in the cabinet. But it's the thing that I feel like my mother is like most proud of when it comes to objects. And so I was thinking about them and kind of our upbringing. And I wrote this poem called Precious Little Things. My mother stores her fine wedding china in a display cabinet perched perfectly over the dining room table, each piece of porcelain precisely placed. Bowl upon side plate, teacup with handles decidedly to the right, dinner plates precariously set upon their delicate edge, awaiting the rumble of earthquake or heavy step to send them bellyward or worse. With gray-white finish and thin blue line decoration, these enamel wonders are admittedly timeless, elegant in their simplicity. Crystal glasses stand at the ready, begging to be filled with red wine and laughter. Only one has known the joy of being held when my brother at age 2 grabbed it by the stem and threw it to the ground, spreading shards and tears into the crevices and corners of the kitchen. Shivers of this memory still find their way into the unsuspecting barefoot and dust pile. These precious little things, so delicate in their being, are beloved. My mother opens a cabinet but once per year to shine glass shelves on which the set sits. Each plate sighs a breath of fresh air as its prison doors fly open, and it feels the warmth of human touch. But they, inevitably, must return to their lair, where they stand as a reminder of the status we'll never reach. A world of cocktail parties featuring Cabernet worthy of crystal, or bowls filled with bechamel, velouté, or some other French sauce I can't pronounce. Our goulash and Bud Light are not worthy of such royalties. Instead, these porcelain princes look down upon us as we pray a word of thanks over mac and cheese, knowing that we are not the family they were set to serve. They were a wedding gift, a wish, that my parents may someday rise up in this world, join the reigning class where people drink port with pinkies on point, a wish to be rich. But we wear collars of blue, not suits of navy. Our hands are too callous to appreciate their engravings. They sit gathering dust coated in questions of what if, and though I have always loved them, I'll never know if they loved me. So I'll slice this pork chop with steak knife, eye these pretties from my assigned seat, and dream of days when we won't worry about the weight of our wallets. With porcelain on tabletop, crystal glass in hand, we'll cheers and laugh over Yellowtail wine and Frank's hot dogs. Wearing blue jeans and work boots, we'll earn the right to feel like we've made it, because maybe we already have. And a little bit of context about that porcelain. I found out that it was a wedding gift. It was put on her registry, but she really only got a few pieces of this overall set for her wedding. And for the first few years of of being married, she saved up her lunch money every single day and went out and bought them one piece at a time until she had the entire collection. And I read this poem to her one day when I was home for a visit, and I was like, I wrote a poem about these I should share with you. She told me the rest of the story, and I was like, okay, now I need to write about 20 more poems, because I didn't recognize the history of these pieces that while they had no money, were starting a family, my mom was going out and purchasing this beautiful set. Definitely painted a whole new appreciation for it. So those are my poems, little snippet from my childhood. I'm going to close on just one more that's very short. And this is just, to me, this is like the quintessential what it was like for me as a child. I came from a family of 7 kids, big family. I was the middle of 7, and we ate dinner together every single night. It was not a question. You were home for dinner, and that was the rule. And so this is a poem called Nearly 6:30, and it's coincidentally placed during the autumn season. Fuchsia fire fills the sky as leaves fall to the ground. A light scent of hickory or smoke or fog tickles my nostrils, warming my apple cider heart, like how hot shower vapors soothe my brother's asthma each morning. We get on our last bike ride to the end of the road and back, a relay race of pumpkins and corn husks, birch trees and deer trails. The neighborhood cats chase the neighborhood squirrels as the neighborhood dogs bark and claw at sealed windows and gates. Every door is painted yellow, bright, yet practical, appropriate for all seasons, especially one brisk as this. The plants have all gone to sleep except for the few rosebuds too stubborn in their splendor to wilt in the first frost. It is nearly 6:30. The whole family is finally home from work or school or practice, and we eat mashed potatoes with gravy. Thank you so much.